Did you miss me? I know my YouTube's been a little bit dry lately, but as I had mentioned a little bit earlier, I don't put out content on YouTube on days that I'm casting because there's simply not enough hours in the day. And I've been pretty busy lately in that regard. I actually have a cast tonight as well. I'll be filling in for Casanova on GiantSlayerTV's Fight Night for North America, so feel free to check that out at twitch.tv/GiantSlayerLOR at about 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tomorrow, the online league series is running a tournament in the Riot format style, so if you don't need to try and qualify through the Last Chance Gauntlet, go ahead and come try out your lineup, see if it gets it done, find any weaknesses in it, and I highly recommend you take advantage of that. I'll be casting that as well. And then Sunday, we have the seasonal tournament, which is what this is all about. Now, a very popular strategy in Legends of Runeterra has been to run counter lineups trying to pick on one of these decks. In a 1,024-person tournament, and what is effectively single elimination if you want to make it to top cut, I think that trying to pick on a deck is a very dangerous strategy. Even if you are correct that picking on that is the correct strategy, it's still dangerous because let's say that you decide to pick on Frostbite midrange. And for 3 rounds, you destroy every Frostbite midrange player. If that is the effective strategy for the tournament, there is a good chance that in round 4 or 5, you are going to run into another player who brought an anti-Frostbite midrange matchup. And then you're kind of in this weird 50-50 situation depending on what decks you brought. It's totally fine to try and pick on one specific deck as long as you still have a good spread of matchups. And I think that's one of the reasons that things like Shen, Fiora, and Frostbite midrange are going to be so popular. Mist Wraiths is a very popular deck. It's very easy to fit into lineups. You could even fit 2 into a lineup if you tried really hard and squeezed your butt cheeks together. But the deck is vulnerable. While it does have good matchups against a couple of the tier 1 decks, it does fall short on Shen, Fiora, and Frostbite midrange more often than not. So what I'm going to try to do is give you as much information as I can about matchups among these decks so that you can make an effective lineup. Sure, safety can be the name of the game. At the end of the day, people are going to top playing counter lineups, safe lineups, wild lineups, aggro lineups, triple control lineups, things that you wish you could have played and didn't have the balls to do. They did, they got lucky, they topped. That's card games. Somebody's going to win this tournament. It doesn't matter that you have to go 10-0 to do it. Somebody, one person, is going to go 10-0. Might as well be you. Yes, luck is going to play a factor. Get over it. And the sooner you get over it, the sooner we can start to craft an effective lineup for you. Now, I think that you should have been testing for a while now. You've been a good little person. You should be testing. So ideally, you're only really looking for what your third deck is. Maybe you're on the fence about something. Try to give you as much info about the tournament and the format as I can. So everything in Tier 1 has been the most popular by a landslide. Feel the Rush has been popping up a little bit more, but honestly, aggro has almost completely fallen to the wayside outside of Mist Wraiths, and that's because Mist Wraiths really teeters on that aggro mid-range line. This is going to be an extremely mid-range and control-focused tournament. The reason that aggro doesn't counter something like that is because you don't have good matchups into necessarily everything on here. Draven Ezreal, Shen Fiora, and Eclipse all do phenomenal against aggro, and that's part of the reason that it's been gate-kept so long. Now I want to talk about specific matchups that have been changed a little bit as of late. For example, Harrowing Anivia. This is a very popular deck, has really polarizing matchups, doesn't do super well against Mist Wraiths, and generally Anivia can be broken down into, can you out-aggro the Anivia? If no, do you have an answer for the Harrowing? If no, you lose to Anivia. And Back Alley Poker previously didn't do either of those things, but now as players have started to add copies of Withering Wail, and more importantly, Commander Ladros, they actually have turned the tides on the Anivia matchup. And I think that means that Anivia will be a little bit less popular going into the weekend for those players that have figured that out, because yes, Avalanche cleans up the early board of Back Alley Poker, and then Anivia could kind of sit here and do a pass back and forth in the later stages of the game. Just kill your unit when I see it, don't let you go hard into pack your bags, and that means that you don't have an answer for the Harrowing, because previously the only way to do that was to either pack your bags Ruination or Ruination and then play enough go-hards to kill every Anivia that came out, which just really isn't happening. You could Ruination Twisted Fate in the same turn. Like I said, there were answers. They were pretty few and far between. Now with Withering Wail, it does get a lot easier when you have that pack your bags available, as well as just to deal with Anivias in general that are coming out of her Kindlers and things of that nature. But more importantly, Commander Ladros means that they can't sit there and play a late game pass game back and forth with you, because eventually you will kill them with Ladros and pack your bags. And generally we've been finding that as long as you don't kill that first Anivia, Commander Ladros is going to outrace the Harrowing. especially if you have 2 copies of it or something like that. It really does help if you find both Ladros, or at least can chronicler your Ladros, because otherwise you have to attack with it. They get more Niveas in the death pool, and their harrowing might actually start to outrace you. So definitely put Commander Ladros in your back alley poker deck. I know Teal Red was on it for a while. A lot of the Americans weren't really following suit. Everybody's figured out it's important, because it's also a very important mirror breaker. There is no answer in back alley poker for Commander Ladros. The Shadow Isle meta right now is just Commander Ladros. It's shifted a little bit from what it was earlier on in the meta, but I definitely think that Ladros is sort of what a lot of people are going on. If you really wanted to, I don't necessarily hate putting a Ladros in your Fearsome deck. It's something that we saw way back in the day, and granted the card pool was a lot smaller, but that is where the Ladros terror started, was in Mistwraith decks. Just having this turn 9 win condition, because there are matchups in the game where you are going to go to turn 9, and having that auto win button sort of felt like cheating. It felt nice. And it's also really good in the back alley poker matchup, because as I had mentioned, they don't have a good answer for it. Granted, in Mistwraith, probably going to beat that deck anyway, but yeah, I definitely would recommend, if you're playing any Shadow Isle deck, maybe just try out putting 1 Ladros in there. And so let's talk about Draven Ezreal. Draven Ezreal is sort of along the same vein as Shen Fiora, where it doesn't feel like it really has any terrible matchups. Captain Farron is a very good win condition, and you kind of have that ability to out-aggro the early game, or at least stalwart or aggro decks in the early game by matching them on board, constantly removing things. The problem with the deck is that it's not as consistent as Shen Fiora. There are a couple of bricks. Top decking things like Tribeam Improbulator really late in the game don't feel good. But the deck is still very solid. You're going to see a lot of it, and that's sort of the problem that I have with this tournament Tactician, is that these 3 decks, Draven Ezreal, Shen Fiora, and Frostbite Midrange, are all very safe decks. Then you have Mistwraiths, which is really just here to throw a wrench into things like Anivia and Back Alley Poker, which are some of the more powerful decks in the format that are just doing some good things. And then Eclipse is kind of off here in La La Land. It almost should join these 3, just because it's... Every game that you play with Eclipse is going to be different because of the way that the invoke mechanic works, and generally Great Beyond is considered to be the best deck in the game. So if I had to sort of give you a long summary of what I'm doing here, these are the safe decks, these are the powerful decks, and this is sort of the anti-meta deck. This exposes a lot of weaknesses within the format. In both Anivia, Back Alley Poker, and Starspring, which Starspring is still very good, we just haven't seen it a whole lot, but I kind of wanted to focus in on these 7 decks because I think they are far and away what you're going to be seeing the most. I'd be very surprised if you ran into a lineup that didn't have one of these decks in it, is probably the best way to put it. And I think that there's not going to be as much Mistwraiths as you might expect, because they're, Back Alley's kind of turning the corner on that one. A couple of players have started running the Cursed Keeper, which is helping them out. It's still not favored for them by any means, but Mistwraiths is something that gets picked on. It's really not good into the safe decks, and like I had mentioned, I expect the safe decks to be in just about everybody's lineup. And unfortunately, that's about where the tournament Tactician runs dry, guys. There's only so much information that I can give you. I have talked a lot about a lot of these decks in previous tournament Tacticians. If you feel like you need to go back and watch those to prepare for this weekend, I encourage you to do that. But at the end of the day, I mean, sometimes things are just simple. And having nonstop injected tournaments into my eyes over the last 9 days, this is about the conclusion that I've come to regarding the seasonal tournament. Now, let's be real. There's no universe where I get to tell you how to top this tournament. As I had mentioned, luck is going to play a big factor in terms of matchups, and well, sometimes you just get lucky and sometimes you don't. Hopefully you get a cool card back out of it. But if you want to play the safe game, if you want to say nobody can pick on me, these are the kind of decks that you want to be running. Frostbite Midrange is a little bit more exploitable than the others, but Draven Ezreal is a little less consistent than the others. Personally, if I were going in this weekend, I'd probably run something like Shen Fiora, Eclipse, and Back Alley Poker. Would just sort of be Boulevard's lineup. Let me just visualize that for you. Yeah, so this would be Boulevard's lineup. Have I tested? No. Have I put thought into it? No. These are just the decks that I like the most. I think they're all very solid, and I mean, that's kind of the point, right? A lot of these decks are just solid. When we get down into tier 2, there's not nearly as much personalization in the meta as you would think right now. For the most part, people are just running some combination of these 7 decks. Every now and then you'll get like one of these other decks thrown in. We've seen, as I had mentioned, Field of Rush is something that, it can out late game the Anivia potentially, or rather out mid game the Anivia. You know, Ramp is considered to be good into back alley. Shenfiora almost never is going to get the Shenfiora win condition off of it. So I definitely feel like Field Rush might even just be in this sort of lineup. Like, you throw it in the powerful section. As I had mentioned, it does have its bad matchups. Aggro tends to do very well against it, but we're not seeing a lot of aggro. So maybe Field Rush is sort of that, like, not necessarily wild card, but something that people didn't necessarily expect. And with that, we're actually at about the end of the station, everybody. I really hope that I could give you some cutting-edge analysis to give everybody who watched this video a much higher leg up in the tournament than everybody else. But at the end of the day, in a tournament this large, in a meta this unpredictable, it is hard to say. Because while I expect at least one of these decks to be in every lineup, it's pretty easy to say that I expect one of 7 decks to be in every lineup. That's not really a groundbreaking statement. It doesn't really give you any information, and as I had mentioned, it's just too personable in Legends of Runeterra, especially because, you know, you have the top 700 Masters players as well as people that are entering from the Gauntlet, and as much as you can study the Masters players, you know, they're all kind of buddy-buddy with each other, not all 700 of them per se, but there's enough that you would have a good read on the meta. The Gauntlet players do throw a wrench in the works, and this is about the best that I can give you in terms of trying to let you know what the meta is going to look like. At the very least, I've narrowed it down to 7 decks, which is, you know, actually pretty small for a Legends of Runeterra meta. Aggro's not going to be there, but at the end of the day, sometimes things are just simple, and this simple analysis is what you're going to have to work with going into the weekend. So, while Tournament Tactician may have felt a little simple this week given the grand scale of what we're walking into, I've done my best to do something else to supplement it, and that is give you a tournament. Tomorrow, the Online League Series will be running a Riot format tournament all played out in one day because the tournament, the seasonal tournament rather, is on Sunday. So, we're going to run it all out in one day. It starts at about 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I believe, so about 7 a.m. PST. But, you know, if you got to practice for the seasonal tournament, maybe you got to wake up a little early. It's an EU-friendly time zone as well. It is open to everybody. It's very popular with Latin American contestants in the past, so everybody's going to be there. You're going to have a really good grasp on the international meta. And maybe, you know, you play against the European and you think, oh man, this sucks because I need to know what the American meta is going to look like. But if the European beats you, you know, maybe the EU meta does counter the NA meta, and that's something that you can take away from it. It's going to be a really good learning experience, and I highly recommend that you enter it. It is kind of an all-day affair, so maybe you don't have the time to put aside for it. Maybe you need to enter the last chance qualifier gauntlet. But hey, you can at least tune in and check out the action because we'll be casting that over on twitch.tv/shitjustworks. And actually, Shit launched a website, which I wanted to bring up to you guys because he's putting all of our casts up there. If you've been following the channel and you're like, oh man, why doesn't Boulevard put up casts anymore? It's because SJW's been doing it for me. He's been doing it all the time. So I'm actually going to have a link to that down below. I think I'm going to continuously link his website because I'm a caster and those are my casts and I would love for you to watch those. It's kind of why I'm here. But aside from the Online League Series, as I had mentioned, I will be filling in for Casanova on Giant Slayer tonight, and I'm really, really excited for that. It's a great opportunity for me, and I really hope that you guys can tune in and enjoy it. I'm going to have an absolute blast doing it. Blevin's a great guy, and I'm really excited for it. I did a little promo video for it on Twitter. If you want to check that out, that'd be great, because it took a lot longer than it should have for a 40-second video. But speaking of Twitter, follow me on Twitter from the BLVD. Get all the updates on when and where I'm going live. And that does it for me, guys. My name is Boulevard. And as always, sincerely, good luck in your tournaments.